We're still on for meeting this afternoon.
Yeah. Had a good weekend, but I'm pretty sure. Pretty great. We were actually there.
Yeah.
I found watch my here, not comment on any of those posts. Understandable. I get it. I wouldn't honestly find it in my heart to comment things that had gone the other way. I could find it in my heart to not comment ugly things, but like, no support, no comment, no comment. I support. So,
You got the game?
I was.
Like,
It was fun.
I was like, oh my God, the first play, we just ran down the hill from I was like, and I'm not even really thinking, man, I just, I was like, holy crap. We're
Yeah, I
gonna
figured
do.
you would be interested because you're a tech fan, aren't you? Why, I always say that wrong. Why do I feel like you're a tech fan? Okay,
Say I'm gonna do something.
maybe because your besties with Renee, so I figured you would support your bestie.
There we get to that. No. But it's like, it was really my follow, well, we like Boise State, me and my son, we always been Boise State man. It's, but we like Georgia by default, my grandfather, or, Tracy's dad was a big Georgia fan, so just kind of like by default, we just like, because they're local,
Yeah,
but they're still fun, not like that.
yeah. Hi, Cam.
Hey,
Fair. Yeah, it's funny, the first two drives, every game that we've played this season where we did well, that's what the first two possessions looked like.
Yeah.
We did absolutely nothing and the other team scored. So the fact that we came out and did nothing, I was like, okay, this is right. And then the fact that y'all scored, I was like, okay, this is still on par with what I'm trying to see today.
right.
Ended up working out.
Yeah, it was like, okay, we had friends over there, who were big fans, we did like a big pot of chili and had everyone kind of come over about 3 o'clock and just started drinking and, oh my God. And kept on drinking, and kept on drinking, and kept on drinking, and kept on drinking. I was like, whoo. I was like, I am not 21. I cannot do this shit. But yesterday, I was like, I'm moving on the couch. We went and got Bojangles breakfast there while I'm over.
Fair.
Got Bojangles.
What were you drinking?
Thanks, Mark. I started off with like during the game, like drinking like high noons, the vodka,
Yeah.
and so drinking some high noons. So I was like, all right, that'll just be a nice little easy.
Yeah.
Because, and then switched over to the maker's part.
I think you did it backwards. You're supposed to start with the harder stuff and then ease out of it.
I finished by about 12:30 on Friday. And then 2:30, people are still in their group text, they're gonna group text, talk about other things. Bruce girlfriend stayed like 3:30, drinking more on the back patio, just having fun, just living her best life. And I was like, the hell you guys do this? I can't do it.
I can't hang. We came home and watched the rest of, was it the FSU game? And I fell asleep on the couch. I was like, I can't be awake this long. I'm exhausted.
But you were sober too. That's what's.
I was also sober. Thank goodness, as I should be.
You should.
I didn't see drink. I was just tired. Hey, Kathy.
Good morning.
I guess we can go ahead and get started. Kathy, do you have any questions, anything that you want to know about?
My current challenge is the timing as to when I ask for the divorce decree. And, since this is kind of a high profile person, lots of probably money, et cetera, they may not want me to know. Do
Okay.
I ask them to, and the buyer chooses the closing attorney? So who gives us that advice and up until that point?
Yeah, so first off, they say the buyer chooses the closing attorney. Really, what happens is it comes over on their offer. So the seller and the listing agent are entitled to an opinion on it. It's a negotiable term in the contract. So like if you wanted to put in the listing that you have a preferred attorney, if you're doing a counter for something else, wanted to add that to the counter, you have every right to do that. So that's not a problem. But at the end of the day, you don't necessarily want to lose a contract just over the attorney as much as I would love for you to do that. That's not always the case, but don't think, oh, the buyer chooses, so I have no right or no say in the matter. It's a negotiable term of the contract. But as far as when to ask for the divorce paperwork, I think your listing agreement gives you a great opportunity to ask about that without looking like you're prying. So if you look at your exclusive brokerage agreement for sellers, there's a section in there that talks about special circumstances. And divorce is one of the items in that special circumstance list. So I would recommend going through that brokerage engagement agreement with them, paragraph by paragraph, at least for the part that you're filling out. And when you get to that, say, there's a lot of different circumstances that can affect a closing. I want to go through all of them with you now. Let's talk about which ones are relevant, what paperwork we'll need, so that we can have all of that information gathered, so that when the attorney asks for it, you're not scrambling to look for paperwork. And you can go through and say, okay, is there any bankruptcy that we need to be aware of? No, okay. And just kind of go down the order. But divorce is one of the things on that list. So if you know they're getting a divorce, you can say, I understand, we've talked about you being divorced. Is your divorce finalized? Yes. Okay, great. Do you have the final decree and the settlement statement? If they say, we don't want you to see that, you can say, I totally understand. I don't necessarily need it, but the attorney is going to need to see it. So I want you to go ahead and have it pulled out and ready to go so that when the attorney asks for it, you can send it right over. At this point, you've pulled the deed. You have the deed, right? Is that the one I pulled for you?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay, and is it both of them or just the one person you've been talking to?
Just the one person I've been talking to. They talk. She knows where he is. It's not like he's, MIA. And they're in agreement to sell it the best I know at this point. The only thing I don't know is if there's a timing issue as to when the property should or must sell.
Well, that would be in the settlement agreement, but honestly, keep in mind that the settlement agreement is incorporated into the divorce decree, so it has the weight of a court order. But the settlement agreement, the people who are bound by that are the two people that signed it, so the two people who got divorced. So if it says, like wife maintains ownership of the property, it doesn't necessarily pull the husband off title, but she's the one that you might be dealing with. But then it might say she must sell the property within 90 days of this being signed. If you're 6 months out and they're both agreeing to sign it, the judge is not going to come out and say, hey, I'm going to swoop in and steal this house because y'all didn't follow your court order. As long as they're both in agreement, it doesn't really matter. The problem comes up when the wife is supposed to sell it in 90 days. The husband is not agreeing, and now he's taking her back to court because we're 6 months out. That's really the only time where it would come up and be problematic for you. But it sounds like they're in agreement to sell it. So that shouldn't be a hurdle. Not that it can't be a hurdle, it shouldn't be a hurdle for you. Is it the wife or the husband that you're dealing with?
It's the wife. It's
The wife.
more of she told me from the very beginning that she wants to maximize her return, and he is ready to just liquidate ASAP. So that's where just kind of going at this and Enrique's helping and choosing and recommending an excellent price point. But I just think that she's going to want to hang on to it, as she said, to maximize, but also delay and having to move and just working those things out.
Yeah, as far as the timing goes, I mean, if you have the settlement agreement, that might help you persuade her to sell quicker if it says something about it. But I don't know that. I think at the end of the day, there's gonna have to agree on the timing. It's
Mhm.
really your most efficient path of least resistance, is have them agree on the timing. You can talk to them about the pricing, you can explain to her why now is a great time to go ahead and sell and go through all of that. But I don't know that having the settlement agreement is gonna give you a ton more leverage to do that. And if they're high profile and they don't want you to see it, I think for me, I would feel like it would be riskier for you to push to see it, to maybe have just a smidge of extra leverage than rather just let them go ahead and agree and not kind of get in the middle of that. Because I think they might appreciate that less than you kind of staying in your lane, doing your job and getting the property sold is what I would recommend. Obviously, you know these people better than I do, but I just don't think there's a whole lot in that settlement agreement that's gonna aid you in pushing her to sell quicker.
Okay.
That makes
Yes, right. They are, I think, quite intelligent, so I have no problem staying in my lane. I
that's
might
how I
actually
would handle
learn
it.
something from them too.
Yeah, and if you get any pushback about how the attorney doesn't need to see the paperwork, I don't want to share it with them. He's never been on title, blah, blah, blah. We're happy to have that discussion with them and explain why, but kind of at a very basic level. When there's a divorce, it's a type of litigation, and the other spouse, whether or not they've ever been on title, could have contributed to the mortgage. The title insurance company doesn't care whether they actually have. That's a very difficult thing to prove or disprove. Since they could have, we have to review the paperwork to see what is needed from that ex-spouse. It's a risk assessment type thing that the title insurance company does. Again, we're happy to have that discussion and explain it, but if you do get that pushback, the attorney doesn't need to see it because he was never on title, go ahead and at least set the stage. Yes, they do. And you can talk to them about why, but basically he could have an equitable interest. It's kind of the bottom line that way. And if you don't get the paperwork and they still don't believe you, it's fine, but you've at least set the stage so that when we come in and say, hey, we need that paperwork, A, they're gonna have in the back of their mind that we might need it because you've already talked about it. And B, it's gonna make you look really good because you preempted me asking for it by saying they very well could need it. And the other thing is it's public record. So your divorce decree and settlement agreement, which is incorporated into the decree, is public record. So if I know the county they were divorced in and it was in Georgia, my examiner can go pull that information anyway. So people who say, oh, I don't want anyone to see it, don't really understand how the system works because it's literally public record. Anyone can go pull it. It's just easier
Right.
for them to have it on hand.
Right.
Or if it's
Okay.
not in Georgia, I can't go pull it. But
Right.
whatever state they're in could go pull it. So public record, it's just my examiner only operates in Georgia.
Okay.
Does that help?
Oh. Yeah, that helps. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Ashley, this is Connie.
Hey, Connie, how are you?
I'm doing well. Congratulations on your win.
Thank you. I'm very excited. Very, very.
Unfortunately, I missed the first 8 minutes of the Zoom call, and it sounds like that would have been very helpful to me because I do have a question regarding a divorce situation.
Okay.
I'm very, very, very early in the relationship with an old acquaintance of mine, and her situation, as she described to me, is she has title to the house. She is married to another woman, and my acquaintance friend has moved out and has the other woman that's she's married to and has been for I think 8 years, is in the house with 3 young children. And she wants to, she's talking with a divorce attorney, of course. But is it, first of all, I'm assuming, and this is where I probably should have listened to the whole discussion you just had, but I'm assuming that even though she's solely on the title, that it's, community property and that it will be split 50-50. Is that correct?
No, Georgia doesn't have that rule. Now, could it end up being split 50-50? Yes, but Georgia doesn't mandate that. Just because they're married, they don't split it. Like in Florida, it might work like that. Other states have the community property law. Georgia doesn't. So that's not necessarily, by default, what would occur. The first thing I would tell you is, have you pulled the deed? If not, feel free to send me an email with the property address and the county the property's in, and I'll pull the deed for you. Because I hesitate to believe a seller when they say I'm the only one on title, because I find that like it's a 50-50 shot that they're either correct or they forgot they added their spouse at some point in time, right? You see that all the time too. So first thing, let's make sure she's correct and that this wife is not on the title with her. But if she is correct and the acquaintance is the only person on title, then it's not that we have to split proceeds 50-50. I would personally tell her to wait to file any paperwork with the county. Because if she's married, legally married right now, she can sell the property and she doesn't really have to do anything as far as getting consent from sending proceeds to the soon-to-be ex-spouse, because that'll all get handled in the divorce paperwork, right? When they do the settlement agreement, instead of the asset being the house, the asset will be whatever her proceeds from selling the house are. The biggest hold up on that front is actually getting the wife out of the home, because at the closing, the seller will sign the owner's affidavit, which essentially says that nobody else is in possession of the house. So you can't physically get the wife out. That's going to be your only problem if she doesn't file for divorce until after the closing. If she files for divorce before the closing, then it's going to be pending litigation. We are definitely going to need a deed from the wife that's living in the house. We're going to definitely need the wife and your acquaintance to sign what's called a pending divorce disbursement agreement. It essentially says everybody acknowledges that there's open litigation by, the terms of the divorce. Makes it, the pending divorce is open litigation. There are proceeds and they're to be split in the following manner. And then they would both sign off on that, so they would have to agree to the split. Now, if the split is 100% to the acquaintance, 0% to the wife, that's fine. It's just both of them have to sign off, as do their attorneys. So typically title insurance companies do like to see that both sides have attorneys or neither side has an attorney. It is a little bit problematic when the only person with an attorney is the one that is on title, in control of the sale, and getting all the proceeds. That might get a little bit dicey as far as a pending divorce. If the divorce is finalized, then we're going to look and see what the settlement agreement actually says, and then we'll try to follow that. But at the end of the day, most of the time, both parties have to agree to the proceeds split, unless it's very clear in the settlement agreement that the other spouse is not needed at all.
Okay, that was a lot of information. I hope I remember all that.
Feel free to ask me again, it kind of as we go along, but I would say step one, let's get the deed. So go ahead and email me if you don't have the deed already, the property address and the county it's in, so I can pull that for you. And then we can discuss the right path once we know who's actually on title.
Okay, thank you. I will certainly do that.
And the other thing I would go ahead and do is tell your acquaintance, and you can't always do this, but if your acquaintance is comfortable waiting to file for the divorce, wait until after the closing to file for the divorce. If she absolutely can't do it because she hates this woman all of a sudden, that's fine. We can make it work, but it's going to be a little bit more cumbersome of a path to closing if she files for divorce.
Oh, okay. I was thinking just the opposite, that it would be better to get the divorce done first and then sell.
Well, the divorce, so easiest path is you sell it before you file anything. Second easiest path is you file for divorce, you complete the divorce, you get your final decree and then sell it. Most difficult path is selling it in the middle. You have
Right.
filed for a divorce, but it's not yet finalized. That's your worst option of the three. We can make it work for all three, so I'm not saying it's impossible, and if it's a situation where she's got to go ahead and get divorced, like, don't encourage her to like ruin her life otherwise for the sake of the closing. But if it doesn't make a difference to her and she's fine waiting until after the closing, that is definitely your easiest path.
Okay, well,
I'll also add too, Connie, if she's selling that and then trying to buy something else, and she's getting financing for a new home, if she's mid-divorce, that's problematic too for her new loan, because if she's filed but hasn't completed it, the lender's gonna wanna see a finalized divorce decree too, just to see how, is someone paying child support, is someone getting it, is she paying it, those kinds of things. So if she's selling it and then trying to buy something else, just like Ashley's saying, it'd be easiest if she either had it filed yet or was completed.
right, okay, good point. Thank you.
Yeah.
I also was wondering about just, I'm thinking that the wife that's remaining in the house with the 3 young children, I'm thinking the house is gonna be trashed and she may not have any interest in keeping it show ready. Would it be appropriate or allowable to somehow incentivize the spouse in the house, saying, well, if we sell for, greater than 400,000, you can get this amount of money.
So as the agent, you should not pay her to do that. I think that would look a little bit fishy. Can your acquaintance pay her? Yeah, absolutely.
That's what she meant.
The acquaintance can pay her, but not as part of closing. Like, we can't have a line item on the settlement statement that says, $5,000 to wife. It's gotta be, all the proceeds go to the seller, again, if they're the only one on title. And then the seller would turn around and give her whatever amount of money. If she wants to do that she can do whatever she wants with her money, once she's got it. But it's not something that can happen in the closing. If you're doing the closing before any divorce is filed for. If you're in the middle of a divorce, now all of a sudden you've given this other party control to ask for whatever she wants. Like, she might say, I'm not willing to sign any of the paperwork unless I get half the proceeds. And maybe she doesn't deserve half, maybe at the end of the day, a court would say you don't get half. But unless you have a court order saying, a specific court order saying, you can sell, acquaintance, you can sell this house and you have to give wife $5,000. Or acquaintance, you can sell this house and you don't have to give wife anything, like a very specific court order. Really, the wife who lives in the house has a lot of control and power if it's a pending litigation. Pending divorce. If it's finalized, she's probably still got more say than if you do it before the divorce is final, or before the divorce is filed for. But it just depends on what the settlement agreement says. And at that point, the wife has some sort of control, because when you sign the settlement agreement, it's both parties agreeing to it. So she's not going to sign a settlement agreement to move towards a final decree for divorce unless she's comfortable with what all is laid out in that agreement regarding the property, all their assets, childcare, what have you. So you could, like, to answer your question, your acquaintance could incentivize her to say, once I get the proceeds from the sale, I'll give you $5,000. And that's totally fine for your seller to do. It's just, we can't send it directly from the closing, because that person at that stage has no claim to the property at all, not a title issue. There's nothing recorded giving that person any kind of right to proceeds.
Okay, I understand. So it has to be totally outside of the closing, the settlement statement.
Correct.
Unless
this person's on title, at which point then we're splitting proceeds however they agree.
Yeah, okay. I guess third question is if she sells prior to filing the divorce, how does she get the wife out? I mean, is it a normal eviction process, which I'm sure she doesn't want to do because of the children?
Yeah, and I'm not sure exactly how eviction works when it's like the spouse that won't get out. I would encourage her to talk to her divorce attorney once she has one, and then possibly an eviction attorney, because they'll know the nuance if she really is like a tenant or not to be able to evict her. But really, like, yes, that is essentially the only pathway to getting them out of the house would be, I would assume that she could evict her, but I don't know if there's something to do with the fact that they're married that changes that law a little bit.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's not really anything that you can do to get her out other than the seller legally, like, going through the proper channels to have her removed.
Okay, and one more question. If, you know, my question about the incentivizing the spouse in the house to get out, um, assuming they're on such bad terms that the spouse would not agree or trust my acquaintance to do what she said, would you suggest like that her divorce attorney draft up a little agreement or something?
That would be fine. Alternatively, if we need to send money to a divorce attorney to be held in escrow at their account, that typically gets approved by the title insurance company, because it's not giving the proceeds to someone else, because it could theoretically still go to the seller. So like sending it to another attorney, we do that for closings, right? Like if your seller is selling a property with us and buying with another attorney, we can send the proceeds to the other attorney for them to use for that transaction for our seller. So if, your attorney or the seller's attorney could draft up some kind of agreement, and they could do that if it was really so contentious where they're like, no, I don't even want you to touch the money because I don't trust you'll even follow this agreement. Because really the wife would have to sue your acquaintance to enforce that agreement anyway, which is kind of expensive and might not be worth it. If what they want is for us to send, let's say it's $5,000 to the seller's divorce attorney, that's okay. We can almost always get something like that approved, and then that attorney can deal with what to do with that $5,000.
But I thought you said that would have to be outside of the settlement statement. So why would your office?
The seller is telling me, I want you to send part of my proceeds to my attorney.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Yeah, and so I wouldn't touch any agreement that she's got with her wife or anything like that. That's not relevant to our closing. All that's relevant to us is I want part of my proceeds to go to my attorney. And then
Okay.
get the title insurance company to approve it, but typically that would be okay.
Okay. As long as it goes through the attorney and not directly to the wife.
Correct.
Well, that's weird.
The spouse.
Pardon?
You said as long as it doesn't go to the buyer, and we're just clarifying that your sentence was correct.
Oh,
but
I said why.
The spouse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you misheard me, but yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Sorry for that long, strange question.
No, that's great. This is what
We
this is for.
like questions.
We much prefer questions.
Yeah.
For sure. Anybody else have questions?
Hi, Tanaya.
Hey.
More questions, more questions.
I'm gonna close the store.
Okay, well, let me ask you this, guys. Does anyone have any listings that they're having a harder time moving? Or are you seeing that happening? Well, that's good. Well, I just wanted to let you guys know, this isn't a problem, this is a cool thing, but, we've been having some success with agents that are putting, credits with their preferred lender and stuff like that in their listings to generate some interest. And obviously, it's kind of a win-win, because not only can you generate some interest in your listing and people coming to look at it, you're also helping push them our way, which means that it's a smooth mortgage process and you're not dealing with whatever lender they happen to be bringing. So with our two programs that we've talked about a lot lately, the Borrow Smart, which is the $3,000 grant, as well as the new one, which is called Res Source, but that's the one that's up to $5,000 toward down payment. Remember both of those income caps. For the $5,000 one, we're at an $82,000 income limit. For the Borrow Smart, which is a $3,000, it's up to $144,000. So that one's obviously a much higher income. But both of those programs have lower than market interest rates. So we've locked a couple over the last week in the sixes, about a 6.75 and a 6.875, and they're getting money back. So they're really, really great products. So what we're also doing, those are already coming with those credits, but we're also, saying that we'll give an additional credit, like we can. So if you want to put something like that in a listing, if you've got something and it's kind of in that range, depending on the price range of the home is really how we figure out about how much credit we can, come up with to give them, because it's called a concession on our part. So we can only give so much. Before we're not making money. So, if you have any listings or listings that are coming up and you're like, hey, I would love to add that verbiage in there, just shoot me an email or call me or text me and I can kind of tell you, hey, this is kind of what we're having people put. But pretty much, it's going to be something like, $3,000 credit, when using our preferred lender, Aaron B. Armis, on the home mortgage, blah, blah, blah. We can also we can piggyback them too, say, hey, there's this credit for using our lender. Also may qualify, if it's a property that's in the Borrow Smart area, if it's, it is borrower, the borrower has the requirements for income. So you can't say it's totally going to have the $3,000 credit, but additional one. But you can say property qualifies, we can put out both fine print in there. So, we can help you guys get, quite a few $1,000s to a buyer, without your seller giving anything up. So.
And just make sure when you're putting that in the listing that and I know you'll call Aaron before you do it, just be careful that you're saying something like pending lender approval. You're in control of giving the credit if they use your lender. You don't have to say pending lender approval, because obviously they have to qualify to use your lender. But giving like the Borrow Smart program or something like that, you want to make sure it's very clear that it's pending the lender approval, or else you're going to get stuck saying you promised this credit, now you can't deliver.
No, yeah, thank you. And we have it typed out, like I can literally send you, here's the blurb, you can tell me, hey, this is the address of the property, this is what I'm listing it for, and I can tell you exactly, hey, you cut and paste this, which will have the right amount of credit, it'll have all the little disclaimers that you need in there, regarding that they may or may not qualify for Borrow Smart, things like that. But we can help you write that so you don't have to worry if you're doing it wrong.
Erin,
Yes.
is that could just help a random buyer?
Say that again, Connie?
Is that something we could suggest to a buyer?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So always to your buyer clients, let them know about these new programs that we have. That I was directing toward listings, so you can just kind of beef up your listing to try to attract more buyers by offering them credits up front. But yeah, definitely, both of those programs are ones you want to be sharing with your buyers. The Borrow Smart, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, what was the name of the one with the higher income limit?
So the higher one, it's called Res Source, which is based off our parent company of New Res, but it's up to $5,000 for down payment assistance. So think of it as a DPA, a down payment assistance program, that's just completely in-house. So it's not like the county or the state that you're going to this other agency to get the grant. And they have to, normally how that works, they do a loan with us. Once we've got everything underwritten, it has to be sent out to the other program that's actually giving the money. You go through all that, that's why it takes so long and is such a pain for people to do a lot of the programs. This one is one that our parent company has created in conjunction with Freddie Mac. So it's just us. There's no other outside agency, so the money's coming straight from us. We can do everything we normally do, pre-underwrite for people, close in 2 weeks, whatever. And we can add that in if they qualify for it. So it's up to $5,000. It's gonna depend on they call it a 1% down with an asterisk program. I don't like that because then you always have to say up to $5,000 because, you know, if they're doing a house, if they're doing a house that's 250 or less, if that's where the purchase price is, then yes, they're getting $5,000 of that, which is 2%, so they can do 1% down. Anything above that, so really unless they're buying something small or a condo, it's gonna be $5,000 is gonna be the max they're gonna get. So I don't really like to talk about the 1% because once you're over 250 purchase price, they're bringing more than 1%. So let's just call it up to $5,000 toward your down payment. It is a grant. It is never have to be paid back. Doesn't matter if they sell the house in a year, all that good stuff. There are no additional fees like origination fees for the loan. To use the grant program, the rates are better than standard rates versus worse. A lot of outside DPA programs, you'll find the rates are higher because they've got their own rates. So it's really, there are no cons. It's really just all growth on this loan. And it goes with the home possible loan, which has kind of like our Borrow Smart, lower than market interest rates. And this one has the $82,000 income limit. So, but the best thing about it too is that it is not a first-time home buyer requirement. So if you've got someone who has purchased a home or owned a home or been, you know, on title of a home in the last 3 years, they can still do it on the $5,000 one. Borrow Smart is first-time home buyer.
And that's
I'm
such a
sorry.
great about it really being a grant.
Yeah.
Because most down payment assistance programs, they might end up not having to pay that back. But a lot of times, if they like meet certain requirements, they do have to pay that back. Like some of them are structured to where you have to live in the house for 5 years. And then if you do, and you make all your mortgage payments on time, then the entire thing gets forgiven. But then if someone sells in year 3, sometimes they have to pay the whole thing back. Some of them are structured to where, okay, they've been there for 60% of the time, so now they owe 40% of it. And a lot of them have like income requirements even after you, so if you start making too much money, then you might have to pay it back. So they're not all grants, flat out grants. So I think that's a huge talking point for your in-house one, is that it's a legitimate grant. And I'm assuming they still have to make their first mortgage payments on time.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta make them all.
Well, I mean, like, do they have to pay it back if they don't?
I haven't heard a thing about that. I really,
You should always pay our mortgage payments
that's
on time.
something, yeah, I mean, that's something I can, kind of look into to see if there's any fine print, like if they stopped paying and they actually took the house back. I mean, I think that would be. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's just a gift, but.
Well, so it's even
Everything
more
I read.
beneficial to your buyers than the standard down payment assistance programs that you're used to hearing about.
Erin, if I emailed you, do you have a little blurb you could send me?
Yes, shoot, no, that's perfect.
I'm sorry, what?
So yeah, if you want to shoot me an email, I will send it to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, buddy.
What else y'all see going on? Anything interesting? I'm still seeing lots of confusion on mail outs. Are you still seeing a lot of mail outs or not so much for buyers?
Not a ton of mail outs. I think they're more common for sellers. But I have opinions on mail outs, but you go ahead first.
We all have opinions on mail.
That is good opinions, but tips, let's go.
I've got both. But yeah, so the most common piece of confusion I'm seeing is timing, like what is closing date and when does the seller actually get the money? And so with a mail out, regardless of whether it's the buyer or the seller, that party is signing, not in our office, So we gotta get those original documents back in order to fund the transaction with.
Can I pause you for 1 second?
Exceptions, yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's it. I always felt 100% like they've got, the attorney has to get the original docs back before they're funded. Is that ever true that they'll fund on copies?
So sometimes, and that's the exception I was.
Okay, sorry. For years, I was like, no, they have to get them back. They're not gonna fund the money without the real docs.
Yeah, and so I haven't really done that on any sort of regular basis with buyer documents. With seller documents, sometimes when there are extenuating circumstances, if the seller signed, we have scans, we see the scans look good, and we see that FedEx has actually picked it up and we can track it. If both of those things are true, we might be able to get the title insurance company to approve us going ahead and fund it. Now, we might say, we'll close the whole thing, but we're not gonna send your wire until we get that original deed you signed, because we can close the transaction and hold the seller funds. That's two different things, right? Closing in escrow versus holding money in escrow, not the same thing. So sometimes we can do that for seller. Typically for buyer, we get those original documents, because a lot of lenders, and I know y'all don't, but most lenders require funding authorization, and it's really amazing that Onward does not require that, but most lenders do. So what that means is we scan in the documents to confirm the signatures. We're typically not gonna do that with scans. We're typically gonna get the original, scan that in for the funding approval. So I would say, preface your buyers and your sellers. If someone's doing a mail out, then we're gonna close and fund on the following day when we receive the originals. If something comes up, then we might be able to get approval on the seller side. I, again, haven't really seen.
I think it was the one I had, the one where I was surprised, because I was like, they're gonna close. Because we were obviously the lender, the buyer was here, so it wasn't a buyer, but it was a seller mail away. And I guess I just never maybe had experienced a seller mail away where they would or ask you, but it was a big deal maybe, where they were like, no, they really want to close on that, on the closing day, their funds and this and that, and I was just like. I mean,
Yeah, and
I don't know.
typically with a seller mail out, like, let's say your closing is gonna be December 5th. We're gonna have the seller sign on the 3rd or the 4th. so
That's
we
what
have
I
the
was telling them.
original on the 5th. That's almost always how we're gonna do it. But sometimes you have a scenario, like we've got one right now where the seller, they try to do everything right. We set up everything, and then the notary that we had set up to go out to them just like didn't show up. And so that's not the seller's fault, that's not anything crazy, so we made other accommodations, everybody scrambled and the seller got signed, but we don't have those documents yet, so we'll ask the title insurance company, because it's a specific, special circumstance, not that they shouldn't feel like doing it. If they just don't feel like doing it, we're probably not getting approval for that. Title insurance companies want to see that this is, everyone tried to do it the right way.
Yeah.
But we ran into this hiccup, and so they're comfortable, and kind of the comfort part of that, because title insurance companies assess risk, right? So if someone just flat out refuses to do it correctly, what's our trust level that we're gonna get those originals as compared to someone who really tried to do it correctly and FedEx just didn't pick up that day for whatever reason, or the notary didn't show up, something like that doesn't give us pause that the seller is being sketchy, whereas the other one sometimes does. And title insurance underwriters don't have a whole lot of sympathy for people who just don't feel like doing it the right way. That's rarely gonna be very persuasive on that front. So I always preface that, y'all have heard us talk about the Choctaw program. A lot of these investors, whether it's Choctaw or Open Door or whatever, lenders often want the buyer to sign on the closing date. So whereas a seller, we're gonna have them sign a day or two before our closing date. The buyer's gonna sign on the closing date, which means we are gonna fund the following day. So if we've got a seller mail out on our December 5th closing, the seller's gonna sign December 3rd or 4th. If we've got a buyer mail out on our December 5th closing, the buyer is gonna sign on December 5th, and then we'll fund it on December 6th, okay? So that's when we'll send proceeds out, because that's when we'll get those original documents from the buyer. We get a lot of questions about what is our closing date, what does the amendment say? We get sellers who are confused saying the buyer's in breach of contract because the closing isn't done on the closing date. know that your closing date is gonna be, in my example, December 5th. Whether your seller's a mail out and they sign the 3rd or the 4th, or your buyer is a mail out and we sign on the 5th and fund on the 6th. Either way, your closing date is the 5th. Now, again, whether the seller is signing early or on the day of closing, because the buyer is also doing a mail out. So when your seller signs on the 3rd, the 4th, or the 5th, they're gonna sign an escrow agreement. So that's saying, I understand that I've signed my paperwork, and attorney, I authorize you to use this paperwork until this date. So when we're doing a buyer mail out, we're gonna make it the 6th, maybe even the 7th, depending on who, the buyer is, like Choctaw, for example, always funds very late in the afternoon because they're 3 hours behind us. So we might put that to the 7th. But your seller can't say that that buyer is in breach of contract because they didn't get their money on the 5th. Closing date's the 5th, funding date's the 6th. They've signed the escrow agreement saying, attorney, my documents are good and usable up until the 7th. At which point, then they're not good anymore. So just, I think it's helpful when you prep your buyers and your sellers whenever a mail out is involved on the timing aspect of it. And we'll let everybody know, like, hey, seller signing this day, so we should be able to fund on your closing date. Or, hey, everybody, the buyer is doing a mail out. They have to sign on their closing date, so your seller won't get their money until the next day. So we tell everyone that, so you don't necessarily have to keep track of the different timelines I'm giving you now. But just know when we express that, how to be able to turn around and explain that to your client is gonna alleviate a lot of frustration and a lot of stress that we're still seeing with a lot of the mail outs right now.
I have a question for you too.
Okay.
So from the buyer standpoint, that's obviously what affects us 99% of the time, because with the seller, that's fine. But with the buyer, the first thing I'll say is definitely let us know as soon as you can in the beginning of the transaction if the buyer is gonna be a mail away or POA, because there's some things to work through there too. Obviously, that's way faster, but the buyer being a mail away, especially if we have a quick closing, we will try to get that everything completed earlier so that we can get the mail away done and try to close you guys on the original day. But I know in the past we have, like, if December 5th is on the contract, we'll try to get the package out like the 2nd or 3rd so it can be sent and received back on the 5th. Is that for funding? Did they have to like change the date in there? I just noticed when you said,
It depends, so what I see most lenders requiring is that the buyer sign on the closing date. So if you're talking about sending things out on the 2nd or the 3rd, for them to sign on the 4th, most of the time I see lenders requiring an amendment to change the closing date to the 4th, even though the seller's gonna come into the office on the 5th, the seller's gonna get their money on the 5th, like they anticipated, but if it's on the 4th, the seller's gotta come in on the 4th now. Seller can't come in on the 5th for a closing date of the 4th, because you can sign before the closing date, you can't sign after and post date it, that's illegal. So it really, that's what I see most lenders doing, but if the lender approves, hey, we're gonna send you package dated for the 5th, you're gonna sign it on the 4th, but date it for the 5th, then we're fine with that.
I'm pretty sure that's probably what they've done.
Yeah,
I don't remember ever having to get an amendment, but, and sometimes it just does what you said, and they're like, okay, we're fine with funding on the 6th, and nobody is fine.
that's what we've
So-
seen most
Yeah.
often, but if the lender's okay with them pre-signing, meaning they sign on the 4th and date it for the 5th,
Yeah.
then that's fine with us. We just can't post date stuff. So in that scenario, if we moved the closing date till the 4th, because the package was being signed on the 4th, and they were dating it for the 4th, the seller would have to sign on the 4th or earlier, not on the 5th. But if the buyer's pre-signing on the 4th, but dating for the 5th, the seller can sign on the 5th. Yep.
Everything has to be dated the same post date.
It's, seller stuff can be
Seller.
predated, but buyer stuff can't be. I mean, seller can sign on the 4th, date it for the 4th, and
Yeah.
close on the
Earlier date.
that's fine. Yeah, but the buyer can't date things for a day earlier than the seller is dating. And the reason for that is the seller signs a deed, right, that transfers the property. The buyer signs a security deed, which gives the lender a secured interest in the property. the buyer doesn't own the property to sign the security deed until the seller has signed over the property through that limited warranty deed. So the deed has to get signed and recorded before the security deed. So if this is done first, the buyer doesn't actually have the right to sign this because they don't own it. For the background. If they're there.
Ashley,
And the other thing on mail outs that we still see, and this has kind of been true for all the time since I've been here anyway, but there's a lot of pushback on where things are getting signed and how they're getting signed. So know that a direct mail out is not typically something that gets approved. Like if you've got a seller in Kentucky that just wants to take it to their best friend who's a notary and sign it there, probably not gonna work. Okay, so it's gotta either be with an attorney, doesn't have to be a real estate attorney, just any old attorney, or a pre-approved notary service, like y'all have heard me talk about SnapDocs and BankServe. Title insurance companies have already kind of vetted them and approved them. Or if it's like a title company state, if they use the same title insurance company as we're using for the transaction. Obviously, this one is a lot more difficult to ascertain that information. So the first two options are gonna be the better options. But if you have someone considering a mail out, I would just bring up that, like, hey, we'll totally get that set up for you, but just know you can't like take it to your bank to get it signed. It's gonna be a few more steps and there's definitely gonna be fees associated with that. So if you preface that, it's not a surprise for them when they come to us wanting to set it up that way. And also, I don't want it to be a surprise for you guys when we explain it, because it doesn't look great for y'all if you told them, oh, that's no problem, you can just go to the bank and get it signed, and then we say, no, that's not how it works. So I want y'all to have the right information so y'all look good through the whole process.
Ashley, this is super embarrassing. Apparently I've missed way too many meetings. Is this a new thing? I don't
No, it's
recall
always been like that.
this ability to
I've
mail.
been here for the last 7 years or so. It's been like that.
That was
Oh.
good.
Would you suggest actually, like, you mentioned a couple services, like that do the notary that are pretty national, I assume? So, I would probably be interested in knowing that, because sometimes I have a buyer who, whatever, yeah, or even for, yeah. So would you suggest, hey, there's some services that we can recommend that I know would be approvable in your area, or they can find somebody too that you would have to sort of, okay, in that?
We'll set it up. So if it's I want to sign at my kitchen table, we need a notary to come to me.
You'll find it.
We'll set it up through BankServe. We charge for a mail out, we charge $150, unless it's a buyer with a loan, then it's $250 for a mail out. And then BankServe typically charges between like $150 and $250. But keep in mind, for attorney states, BankServe is going to charge more because they have to send an attorney. So like if you have a seller who's in Brunswick, Georgia, and they want us to do a mail out, it's probably cheaper for them to find an attorney to go sign with there than for us to send BankServe, because instead of being $150, BankServe is going to charge like $450 or $650, something that is significantly higher because they're sending an attorney who charges more for their time than just a notary does. So if it's in an attorney state, there might be a higher charge associated with that. Most of the states that we see, like Florida, California, Texas, I think, New York, all of those, I haven't had the super expensive notary, but Georgia definitely does. So mail outs there, somewhere in Georgia, easier, just go to an attorney's office. Cheaper for your client. I don't know about easier, but cheaper for your client. Now, if they don't care to pay extra to have someone come to their kitchen table, that's fine, we'll set it up either way. But just know that that will be more expensive. And don't tell them, oh, it's just $150 for O'Kelly and then $150 for BankServe, when BankServe is gonna charge a lot more. We don't, because it's still the same thing for us, the mail out, but they will.
Is there any conditions that the buyer or seller has to meet, or just be willing to pay for the fee? Pay the fee?
Willing to pay for the fee. For a mail out, just like at a closing, they've got to have the notary, which is, you know, what BankServe will send, whether it's an attorney because they're in Georgia, or not an attorney because they're in another state and it's just a notary. But then they also have to have an unrelated witness. And we put that in all of our information about mail outs. We've had several people recently saying we had no idea that we needed an unrelated witness, or we didn't know that unrelated meant someone not related to us. And there's
Mhm.
only so much like we can preemptively say without like offending people's intelligence, right? But know that they do need to have someone else there. So if they want to sign at their kitchen table and bank serve is coming, they need to get their bestie or their neighbor or something to come sit with them and be the witness for those
Uh,
documents. That has to happen. There has to be someone, whether it's the seller or like if it's bank serve, they'll typically do it. But we have to have a scan of the documents, because if they get lost in FedEx, we gotta have something to, attempt to save the deal using. If they don't scan it to us and we never get the documents, it's like they never signed, they're gonna have to pay to do it all again. They have to send copies of their ID, but none of that is really different than what they'd have to do at a closing anyway.
Mhm. Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
We just love it when people are at closing.
Yes, that makes life so much easier.
So much better.
Much easier. But I will say, if it's, don't be freaked out if it's like a big time investor doing a mail out, because they do
Yeah.
them so much. It's totally down to a science. It's just y'all and your clients understanding the timeline and like the timing of signatures, who's coming in when is money going out, when do you get your commission, all that kind of stuff. It's the sellers who, are just regular people sellers who don't always, of course, know the process, because why would they? But like your Choctaw, your Open Doors or stuff like that, there's not an issue with the mail out or anything on that front, because they do a gazillion a week. Your builders, that kind of thing, those are all, they know what they're doing, so they do it correctly.
Yeah, and you mentioned timing too, like remember if you've got a seller that's selling here and it's a mail away on either side, whatever, especially if it's the buyer side. Just making sure that the timing is right, if they're doing a back-to-back closing or they're trying to buy right after they sell theirs, that maybe there's a buffer there because we have to move that date or something, if the buyer is mail away for some reason and, you can't close without the actual docs, we'd either want to adjust that date up so they get the seller gets their money when they need their money for their next house, or just so you guys can plan it that way.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because if your seller comes and signs on December 5th and we're funding on the 6th, but your seller's trying to buy on December 5th, we cannot send the money until December 6th. So it's a really good point.
Yeah, I had that happen a couple years ago where the seller, and we didn't even realize the buyer was a buyer was a mail away at first, so it was, we were a little late in even being informed of it, we worked it out, but, they did have to adjust, the seller had to change their date because they weren't gonna get, by the time we knew, we couldn't get it back. So it was one of those, didn't fund till the next day, so, it was just a pain, it wasn't the end of the world, they figured it out, but just knowing all that, whatever we can know at the beginning, will just make it so much easier throughout. We can deal with stuff, we can adjust internal timelines if we need to speed up, a day or two to help that not happen, but we need to just know at the beginning, so. Just keep that in mind.
Yeah, and another thing too, like if you, whether it's us or whatever attorney you're using, for us to be able to turn around a power of attorney or to set up a mail out, that's something that we can accomplish like same day, next day, if it's an emergency. But the lender needs to get all of that approved for their underwriter, so they can't turn it around that quickly. And it's not that we're saying, oh, we work fast or anything, it's just, we don't really have many approvals or anything to obtain unless it's, y'all asking for something specific and weird that's different, as far as like a mail out goes. So if you have an attorney that's like, yeah, we can totally do that today, and then they come back and say, oh, wait a minute, the lender needs to get all this approval. Nobody dropped the ball, and it's not that the lender's not doing a good job, they just have more approvals to work through and they need more time for that. So kind of understand that what the attorney tells you. And we're of course gonna try to say, we need to get the lender to approve it and preface that, but in case you run into someone that doesn't, the lender does need a longer time frame in most scenarios to get those approved. But I mean, obviously, if y'all are using Onward and it's an emergency, they're gonna bend over backwards to make it happen as quickly as possible for you. So don't hesitate with emergencies, just when tell everybody ahead of time, because it's just easier
just a good practice to, and then even in one of our template emails at the beginning, please let us know if anyone is not going to be present for closing. So just kind of keeping that in your early in the transaction conversations, just confirming that everyone on the contract is going to be there. And if not, let us know and we'll work through it with them and figure out, is it gonna be a mail away, is it gonna be a POA? The POA, you can't just do it because you're gonna be on vacation. That will be approved, by Fannie and Freddie, so they,
Sellers you can, and it's fine.
yeah, we don't care about that.
Well, this quarter, we have to, when this.
No, we like the render, we don't care what the sellers are doing.
Yeah.
But, as far as the buyers signing their loan docs, they're like, no, you can be here. So really the only things that, or the main things that allow a POA is if they're traveling for work, if it's work related, they can't get out of it. Or if, say you're a surgeon and you've got surgery scheduled, that kind of stuff. Yeah, military, if you live out of state, it's a hardship to come, those kinds of things. So just think really legit, do everything you can to be there, and if you can't, then it's probably approvable, but if it's, oh, we scheduled to be in Tuscany for 12 days and scheduled our closing in the middle, probably not a great idea, let's move that. So yeah, just let us know if they need a POA, and we'll basically just to give you a little background, when as just says the lender takes a couple days or, a little while to approve stuff, what happens is we get the reason, so basically the buyer has to write a letter of explanation explaining why they can't be there. And we get that along with obviously all the information for who they're sending in their place, who's gonna be signing for them, their ID, all that good stuff. And then we do have some POA templates, so we usually try to send over to the attorney with all that stuff and say, hey, this is kind of a pre-approved one that we have. The attorney drafts it, we get it back, and at that point it goes not only to underwriting, but then over to legal. So there's a legal eye on it, even within our company, before it comes back and says, okay, it's approved, then we can send it back to Ashley and they can have them execute it. So there is a little bit, can we do that in one day? Yeah, we have. But just knowing there's like 3 departments basically on our end that are gonna touch that and approve it before it gets signed. So that's why, when it's 2 days before closing, it's doable, but it's stressful.
And one other quick reminder, you asked about whether someone's gonna be at closing. We also, whether it's the buyer, well, not whether, but both on the buyer form and the seller info form, we also ask, is everyone attending closing? Y'all heard me say this and everyone laughs, but friendly reminder, attending means coming into my office to sign the paperwork, not I'm attending from my own kitchen table in Florida, which I legitimately had someone indicate that one.
How did they attend? They said,
No, they wanted to attend at their own table.
oh, they just didn't know where to go?
Yeah.
Oh, well.
So in that scenario, they marked, we will be at closing. And so we didn't know that they were gonna be at the closing at their own kitchen table until like the day before, when they're like, no, we're in Florida, we're not coming, what are you talking about? Okay, cool, yeah. So just know that attending means coming into the attorney's office to sign the paperwork.
Oh, and sorry, we're over the last caveat with that too. If you've got someone going on title that's not on the loan, so say you've got 2 people on contract, but one of them's not necessarily has anything to do with the financing, anyone on title needs to be at the closing. So sometimes I'll get that with a couple, and I'm really working with one spouse that's on title, the other one, or one spouse that's on the loan, the other one isn't. And we're always confirming, hey, Susie's gonna be at closing too, right? Because she's gonna have a handful of documents to sign, so.
And just, I know, again, we're over, but to clarify that there's 2 ways to add someone to title. Way one is gonna be the way that the lender knows about, it's the way we recommend doing. So maybe Bob is your buyer, Susie is his wife, Bob's the only one doing financing, but Susie's gonna be on title, the handful of documents that Aaron's talking about. Susie's gonna sign everything that a buyer signs, because Susie is a buyer. She's not a borrower, she's a buyer, she needs to sign your contract, even though she's not on the loan. She'll also sign the security, because again, the buyer, or the owner has to consent to the property being used as collateral. Even though Bob's the only one that's gotta pay it, Susie's gotta consent. But if you're doing option 2, where Bob is your only borrower, Bob is your only buyer, Bob is the only person who has signed the contract, but at the end of closing, Bob wants to sign a deed out of himself into he and his wife, Susie. Susie doesn't necessarily have to come. It's great if she can come, but she doesn't have to in that scenario. So just kind of heads up, talk to the lender. If the lender is aware Susie's gonna be on title, it's gonna be set up like option 1. But just as a heads up, if we're doing option 2, we can get around Susie coming. She doesn't have to sign anything.
And yes, cool. And I will tell you, if you can have Susie on at the time that we're doing the closing for future refinances, that's better because the Georgia intangible tax is a lot lower if there's no, when we do the loan and we hold the loan and then we refi them later. So all the refi stuff we've been talking about coming up hopefully in the next year or two when rates get lower, where we're doing no lender fees and stuff, the intangible tax is a tax on the loan amount. So if they close as, Bob and Susie, and then in 18 months, rates are low, we're gonna refinance them. As long as nothing changed on that deed and everything is exactly just like it was when we closed and it's Bob and Susie, then the intangible tax is only charged on the difference in the loan amount of the new refi and the original one they had. So, I mean, depending on the loan amount, it can be hundreds to thousands. I mean, it can be a good savings. So that would be, you know, these are all little like, oh, that's a little piece of knowledge I'll never remember. But just think of it, if you know they want to be on title, it's best if they could just do it. They may have benefits later they don't even realize.
Yeah.
But if they can, for whatever reason, they can be out easily.
Yeah. Well, thank y'all. We appreciate you being here. Let us know if you need anything.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Well done. Rude.
We could hear
Thank
you.
you so much. Very helpful. Thank you.
Good.
Bye, ladies.